All right, good evening, everyone. It is just after 5:30 p.m. on Monday, October 21st, 2024. And this is a public meeting of the School Board of West Bend Joint School District Number 1. More than 24 hours prior to the meeting, notice of the time, place, date, and subject matter of this meeting was posted at the entrance doors at the Education Service Center and on the district website. It was also sent to the West Bend Community Memorial Library, the Daily News, WRYU, the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and other media sources that have requested notice of our meetings. At this time, I'm going to pause to ask Superintendent Wimmer to confirm that this meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Great. Thank you. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We recognize a quorum of our board. We have 5 board members present. Dr. Chad Temez is online, and believe Mr. Donaldson will be joining us later. But sorry, Mr. Jenkins. Mr. Donaldson, I apologize. I looked over at your nameplate, and it was embedded right here. My apologies. So, in fact, why don't we do this just for the official record? Also tonight, since we have a member joining us remotely, we're going to take all of our votes by roll call, and I'm going to ask Melanie and other board members to throw a sharp object at me if I forget to do that. But why don't we start with a roll call? So Mr. Swigert is here. Ms. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Jenkins will mark as absent for now. Mr. Donaldson? Here. And Ms. Aragot? Here. Ms. Kruger? Here. And Dr. Temez? Here. Thank you. All right. We recognize the quorum of the board. We'll move forward then with the approval of our agenda. And our agenda was published in advance. I would move to approve this agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kelly. We have a motion and second to approve the agenda. Any discussion? Hearing none, I will call the roll. Mr. Jenkins is absent. Mr. Donaldson? Yes. Ms. Aragot? Yes. Dr. Temez?
Here, yes.
And Mrs. Swigert votes yes. Ms. Kruger?
Yes.
And Ms. Lang?
Yes.
Excellent. We have an approved agenda. We move then to public participation. I have 3 public participation comment cards tonight, so I will read the public participation announcement. We've come to the public participation portion of our agenda. Board Policy 187 prescribes the nature and procedures for this segment. I summarize the policy at this time, but copies of the policy are available in the back of the room, and I urge you to familiarize yourself with the policy in its entirety. Residents of the district, parents and guardians of children in district schools, and employees of the district may participate. Participants desiring to address the board should obtain and complete a participant comment card near the entry and turn it over to the president prior to the meeting or when allowed by the president. Participants may comment concerning an agenda item or a non-agenda item. Each participant will be called to the podium and will be given 3 minutes to speak. The participant must state his or her name and relation to the district. This information will appear in the minutes of the meeting. The board will not engage in debate concerning the remarks or take immediate action. The board may refer the matter to the superintendent, to a committee, or take the remarks into consideration in future action. Board Policy 872 provides a formal process for citizen complaints, and Board Policy 520 provides a formal process for employee complaints. The board recommends use of these procedures as a guarantee of fair and timely response. So I'll invite participants forward to speak. There will be a visible timer right behind me to manage your time, and also I will alert speakers as to who is on deck. And lastly, to help ensure that all participants are heard and that the meeting runs efficiently, we ask that you abstain from conversation, comment, or applause during or after public participation comments. I'll now invite participants forward. And our first speaker tonight is Jay Mundinger. If you'd please come to the podium. Jody Geenan would be next. And Mr. Mundinger, you indicated on your participant comment card that you are a resident of the district. Is that correct?
I am a resident of the district. Have lived in West Bend for just under 50 years.
Fantastic. So if you could, just for the record, state your name, and then the next 3 minutes will be yours.
My name's Jay Mundinger. Live at 663 Highland View Drive in West Bend, just right behind Badger Middle School. This evening, I just wanted to spend a little time and, frankly, thank each of you. It has been a long journey to put together the referendum. And so the referendum that I received in the mail the other day, I thought may have been one of your better representations of a package for our community to go through. And so I know that there's been brisk dialogue. I know there's been disagreement. But this is what we do in our country, is to put pieces of these legislation pieces together so that we can vote on it. So I'm encouraged by what I have read. I could walk in Decorah grade school, because that's where I went back in my early days. Badger would be a little bit different. The high school I also attended, and frankly could walk every hallway and know where every nook and cranny is. And I'm glad that we're looking at providing a safer environment for our kids in all of these schools. Our country has changed, and I believe that what you're putting together is for us a better environment for learning for our children. And so I commend you for doing that. I'm very hopeful that the West Bend community says yes to this. And based on my travels, one of the challenges that I have coming to your meeting is I'm still in business, doing a lot of travel. And communities that invest in schools see investment in the community. And so my hope is, again, that it is approved and that we can move forward briskly and provide our students a great environment for learning. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. Next, we have Ms. Joni Geenan. And then our final speaker tonight will be Mr. Paul Fisher. And Ms. Geenan, you indicated on your comment card that you're a resident of the district. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. And if you'd state your name, and then the next 3 minutes will be yours.
So my name is Jody Geenan. At the last regular school board meeting, I mentioned that I was very disappointed that the permission forms for the book club list no longer have the vulgar words listed for the books. Instead, if there are vulgar words, it simply says limited or some. This comes across as less transparent and very dishonest, knowing how raunchy the language is in some of the books. Superintendent Jen Wimmer mentioned to me at another meeting a few days later that the change was made because the students bring the printed forms home to their parents for signature, and this would prevent them from being exposed to the words we are trying to protect them from. And if the parents want to know the specific words, they can go to the school website to find them. That makes sense to hide the vulgar words from the students, but when I re-reviewed the forms, I noticed that the form does not explain the definitions of limited and some, nor does it say anything about being able to go online to get a look at the specific words. It simply says if the parents have questions about anything on the forms, they can contact the teacher or Dr. Quinn Trueblood. My opinion is definitely that this is still a lot less transparent and honest than it could be, and that most parents and guardians won't contact anyone because they won't want to be a bother. There should be explanations for some and limited, as well as a direct link on the form to find the word lists. Furthermore, upon checking the book looks review on one book, Blended, for 5th grade, the West Bend School District permission slip never mentions the one word of profanity in the profanity column. Also, here's a basic summary of the book from Book Looks. Book contains mild profanity, controversial racial commentary, controversial social commentary including police brutality and gun control activism, and mild violence. Compare this to the West Bend School District permission slip, a story of family, hope, and community. Yikes, this is an example that the permission slips are not transparent in the least. Finally, I'm here to give my last thoughts on the $165 million school referendum. First, thank you for making the wise decision to close 4 to 5 buildings in our school district regardless of whether the referendum passes because of the declining enrollment. The $51 million savings in capital maintenance, the extra savings in the budgeted utilities, staff, and other expenses that go with keeping them open, along with whatever income we realize after selling or renting the buildings, can be used for at least some of the plans for the remaining buildings. I would also like to add that I will not be voting no on this referendum, partly because the money allotted for the new Jackson School is twice as much as was allotted for it in the last referendum that failed. The school is planned to be twice as large as the national average in square feet per student, and the cost per square foot is double the national average for schools. Why all the fluff during a rotten economy where everything
Ms. Keenan,
increased?
thank you for your
Thank
comments.
you.
We appreciate them. We move then to our final speaker, Mr. Paul Fisher. Mr. Fisher, as you approach the podium, you indicated on your comment card that you're a resident and a parent guardian within the district. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Fisher, if, for the
Past board
record,
member as well.
if you please state your name for the record, and then the next 3 minutes are yours.
Thank you. My name again is Paul Fisher, And like Jay, I want to thank you all for the efforts that you've put in to get this referendum to this point. Having done it 5 years ago, obviously it's not easy, but it's stuff that needs to be done. So I just want to read my letter to the editor that ran in the Daily News on Saturday. A strong school system is vital for a thriving community. The West Bend School District excels in offering diverse programming that prepares students for various options after graduation, be that military service, higher education, or entry into the workforce. Past and present district leadership has carefully balanced maintaining facilities while prioritizing students' classroom experience. However, we've reached a critical point. Many buildings are over 50 years old, with major systems like HVAC, lighting, and infrastructure needing replacement. The time has come for district residents to once again invest in current and future students of the West Bend School District. This isn't just about updating facilities, it's about fulfilling our responsibility to the next generation and to our community's future. It's an investment that pays dividends in the form of well-prepared graduates, a more attractive community for new families and businesses to move into, and the continuation of West Bend's tradition of excellence in education. The choice before us is clear. We can either invest in our schools now, addressing critical needs and positioning our community for success, or we can defer these costs yet again, facing even higher costs and diminished educational experiences in the future. Let's choose to invest in our shared future now. Please join me in voting yes for West Bend Schools on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments. And that concludes our public participation. Those are the 3 cards I have. Thank you to those who presented tonight. We'll move then to our consent agenda. On our consent agenda, we have minutes of the October 9, 2024 regular board meeting. We have no contracts or resignations or retirements, but we also have a safety drill review in the consent agenda. Are there any questions on the consent agenda? Hearing none, I'd move to approve the consent agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Melanie. We have motion and second to approve the consent agenda. Any final discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the roll. Ms. Kruger?
Yes.
Ms. Lang?
Yes.
Mr. Swigert votes yes. Mr. Donaldson? Yes. Dr. Temez?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Jenkins is absent. And Ms. Ergot?
Yes.
Very good. That motion carries. Thank you. All right. Let's return to my paperwork here. We move then to reports, and we move first to our Curriculum Committee report, and Melanie Ergot, our Curriculum Committee Chair, will give that report. Melanie.
All right, thank you. So the Curriculum Committee met on October 10th. We had a pretty brief meeting, but we reviewed the Quarter 2 book club lists and made the following remarks: that the digital format for parents and guardians is easy to access and navigate. The communication with parents is clear and consistent, and appreciation for the department's validation of information available from multiple public sources on specific books. Dr. Trueblood also reported the high response rate of parents and guardians regarding their permission preference, and that any new books to the list will be vetted and brought forward to the committee this year. And so this completes my report.
All right, thank you. Any questions for Melanie? All right, hearing none, we turn to Superintendent Wimmer for the superintendent's report.
Thank you. We've been provided with a notice from the Wisconsin Association of School Boards that there is a vacancy for the Region 15 rep. So our district is in Region 15. That was held locally by a board member in Slinger. So they're looking for a rep. The board, each board in the region can submit a name for consideration, and that person would finish out that term until that next election of that. So just providing our board with a notice that there is a vacancy to represent the region on that. So if anyone's interested, certainly let myself or board president know so that we can coordinate the nomination. So again, we get to nominate one per district. So let me know if you're interested in that piece. Then, just a reminder, we did send this to families, but in case people noticed, we had a pre-planned canine search last week. We partnered with the West Bend Police Department and conducted a pre-planned canine search at our high school in Badger. So during that, all of our schools are placed on hold while we execute that and go through. So just a thank you to the Washington County Sheriff's Office, the Ozaukee County Sheriff's Office, Mequon Police Department, Germantown Police Department, and the Wisconsin State Patrol for taking part in this pre-planned search. We appreciate it. We also received communication that the results are in for the 2023-2024 school year High School of Business program tests. This program is a national accelerated business administration program of MBA research and curriculum. So more than 7,000 students from across the nation participated in the program in the last school year. There were 15 East and West high school students and 2 Badger students who scored among the top business students nationwide on these rigorous exams to test their business knowledge. So our students tested so well in the leadership principles of business, principles of finance, principles of marketing, and business of strategies exam that they received that recognition. We will make sure and get their names and do a district news and some social media on that accomplishment. So again, some national competition with our kids being recognized at the top. Speaking of recognition, Georgia Hadorf of the West tennis team qualified for the state tennis championship as a singles player, competed last week at the Nielsen Stadium at UW-Madison, so we thank her for representing the West Bend School District at state. And just a notice that the Holidays Pops concert tickets are on sale. So recall that the Columns organization hosts the Holiday Pops concert from the Milwaukee Symphony at our very own Silver Lining Arts Center. So that will be held Tuesday, December 10th at 7:30 p.m. So it's the MSO traveling to West Bend. Tickets are $30 each and available at Jeff's Spirits on Main, Horicon Bank, Sendix, or by calling Horicon Bank or Pick Heaters. The event is sponsored by the West Bend Community Foundation, and all proceeds will go to scholarships for our high school seniors. So just as a reminder, the Columns organization awards just around $900,000 annually to our graduates. So it's one of the largest local scholarship programs I've ever seen in my career. So thank you to both organizations for their sponsorship. And recall that we discussed that we'll be moved into a new WIAA conference for tournament play. So the newly formed athletics conference that our East and West high schools will be part of has a new name. So it is the Glacier Trails Conference. So in addition to East and West, members of the conference include Kettle Moraine Lutheran, Kewaskum, Plymouth, Port Washington, Saukville, and Sheboygan South. So I know that they've had student athletes actively involved in the naming process, the development process, so we look forward to that transition in the coming year. That concludes my report.
Questions for Superintendent Wimmer? All right, we'll move to our next item. Excuse me, we begin our discussion items tonight. Superintendent Wimmer, I think you're going to take the first one here. Referendum update, transition planning.
Visual when I go to, I've been meeting at schools with staff and families and creating a visual. They certainly have seen the long-term facilities plan for our schools with those closures. We talked a little bit about if the referendum fails and our potential transition, so I just want to highlight a few pieces. So if the referendum passes, we talk about the configurations occurring in the 27-28 school year. We would reopen with Silverbrook being an elementary, Badger being a 6-8 middle school. Anytime I go to a meeting with families, I ask all my current third grade parents to raise their hand. Because if you follow that top line with me, it means next year they'd have grade 4 in their elementary school. They would experience grade 5 at Silverbrook because it currently serves grades 5 and 6, and they would have grade 6 in the newly configured Badger. So to avoid 3 years, 3 schools, we will be preparing to hold all the 5th grade students in their 26-27 school year so that they would skip the Silverbrook transition and then head right to 6th through 8th grade at Badger. So again, that's preparing to retain your 5th grade students in place. We certainly have the room at those schools. That's the reason we're able to close them. We have those classrooms available, and we'd have that time. That would also free up Silverbrook. Again, if that referendum passes, there's an entire wing that needs some remodeling. They could get in and do that and not disrupt the classes down the hall. So we'd maintain 6th grade at that school. So that's something that we've been planning for. The other piece is if the referendum fails. So at our last conversation, we talked about not needing to wait for the build of Jackson to be brought online so that we could accelerate those closures. Again, those closures would still happen, but it moves it up. So we would face the same kind of issue, conundrum, if you will, with the kids and having 3 schools. It's just an earlier cohort. So again, we'd recommend that we, in the 25-26 school year, hold 5th grade in place at their elementary school, move past Silverbrook so that they would start new 6th and 7th graders that following year. That would mean, again, if the referendum fails and we accelerate that timeline, that this spring we're relocating staff into some elementaries and holding kids in place. So we're kind of getting those classrooms, moving some things to ready that. Are there any questions or concerns about us moving that timeline to accommodate that? We believe that we could make that happen. Again, our entire goal is to reduce the need for students to have 3 schools in 3 years, that they would stay where they are in elementary and then make one transition, regardless of if the referendum passes or fails.
Board members, comments, thoughts? Mr. Donaldson, you're reaching for your microphone.
I think that's a good plan. I mean, to hold them and lessen the transitions, I think that's better for the students.
Melanie?
So then when would like Decorah and Fair Park close? Because would there be a kiddo that would maybe be like in for like would they somehow have to have an extra transition in there for one of those was closing or?
No,
That would be like the
that's why we would
following
hold all 5th grade in place. So I'm talking about all of grade 5, every school, not just Decorah and Fair Park. Good point. So everyone would have the same 5th grade experience at their current elementary school, and then they would close, and then they would go to their new school.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be an extra
those
transition
other ones
just for
wouldn't
those
close
two.
yet
You're
until that
correct.
transition
Yep,
happens.
correct.
Question?
Good point. I think the visual helps when we talk about it, when I talk with families at some of the school meetings. We kind of talk that through, and I ran the visual past a couple of parents around, does this? And they're like, yes, that makes sense. So again, it creates that little bit of work, but we will map out that work regardless. So I just wanted the board to know that we're thinking about transition on behalf of kids, let our community know as well, so that we can make sure that we communicate that to families. Any other questions about that transition?
The only comment I'd make is I think that also makes sense. We talked about, one of the things that would be important if the referendum passes was we talked about reconfiguration to minimize these transitions. And so
Correct.
whether it passes or fails, I think we should continue to honor that philosophy. I think that makes sense.
Great, then we will continue to proceed with that planning.
Great. Final call. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. We next move to our action items. Final budget recommendation and certification of tax levies. We invite forward Andy Sarno, our Assistant Superintendent of Business and Operations, to help us walk through this. And Mr. Sarno, I know this is kind of the culmination of many, many weeks of work and new information and all sorts of things. So we look forward to your presentation.
A little bit of all of the above. I appreciate your time tonight. This is generally one of the enjoyable opportunities because of all the work that's gone into this budget. From we look at 9 to about 10, 11 months of history. We have our fiscal year, which it's weird in Wisconsin that we're already a quarter of the way through our fiscal year and we're just setting this final information. And then the audit wrap up, which we're in the middle of the audit. So I still talk about things being unaudited, meaning we don't have a certified audited financials at this point in time. Sharing some information, I will interrupt myself right before the last slide. I'm going to jump through my presentation, share some information, and then I just want to show a couple of highlights. Earlier today, mid-afternoon, I uploaded a budgeting document, and there's a couple important parts there because we're in a little bit different situation this year with the November referendum. If it passes, we have one recommended levy. If it fails, we have our normal recommendation, both budget, levy, as well as the calculated mill rate. So I'll disclose all of that tonight. I even have a supplemental document that talks about the last 2 years of actual history, what was the information that was a part of our annual meeting back in September, and then the 2 options that we have tonight based on what happens on November 5th. So a little bit of the comparison between from September until now, we have calculated estimates or even statutorily provided information that we typically use, July 1st, the Department of Public Instruction is required to give us an updated general state aid estimate. So we've been using that until last Tuesday when we received the final information. We've received estimates of property values until we received the final one about a week and a half ago. So there's some information that I'll share with what's happened over the last month. What's the impact of that variation? Because there is some, as well as one levy that we have is the final piece after I shared my budget document that captures the final budget, the two levies that we have, as well as the two possible mill rates, again, dependent on the outcome of the referendum. So let's take a look at some information. We've been using an $8.063 billion, so $8.063 billion estimated property value equalized since early summer as a part of our forecast model. The actual that we received about a week or two ago was 8.033, so it's about $30 million less. Coincidentally, though, that has about a 2-cent impact on our mill rate. So that's the final information. We look at those variances, how that can be impacted. Our membership, this is our 3-year average because that's what's used to drive our revenue. Originally, we were earlier estimating based on 2 different models that we have, about 5,840 students, FTE, so not heads, but FTE. Which is about 136 students less than last year. The actual that we received was about 17 students less with our 3-year average, so just a little bit less than our earlier estimates. Coincidentally, though, that doesn't impact our bottom line for the current year because there's a hold harmless exemption. I think it's the state's one way to acknowledge that we're already a quarter of the way through the year and they can't adversely impact us. So there's an exemption for this year that holds our revenue flat, even though there's a variance there, but it does impact our 25-26 year, and I'll talk about that at the end with some things that we need to be mindful of. Our vouchers, so that's final information that we received here just last Tuesday again, earlier, and this was an increase, but we were estimating just under $5 million. We're now at about $5.7 million. We don't know who those students are, which schools they're going to, and we believe that there's a new school that's participating in it this year. There's 2 different rates, so if you're an elementary versus a secondary student, there's 2 different rates. We don't know anything about these students. We're given the dollar amount from the Department of Public Instruction as of October 15th, but it's 100% tax funded through the levy. It always has been. It impacts the mill rate, so this $5.7 million, it translates to 71 cents. So think about our mill rate. 71 cents is going to students that are not being educated within our public school system. It's cost neutral in the sense that I don't want to make light of this because it is funded through the property tax levy. But again, we don't know who the students are. The state tells us the amount to levy. We do that. We don't see the dollars where it doesn't even come through our books except it just shows up as a revenue and expense. So it's important to understand that. The debt, we've always shared a little bit of the debt. We have not levied debt now for a couple of years. Tonight, I'm sharing essentially 2 levies as a part of the recommended motion, 2 mill rates, and 2 budget scenarios. So that's a requirement due to the November 5th referendum, whether it passes or fails with the outcome of that question. The state aid earlier estimates, again, based on Department of Public Instruction statutory information that we've used, is that has dropped by a little over $1 million based on the new information that was provided last Tuesday. As you know, our revenue limit minus our state aid equals property taxes. And so if the state aid goes down, that adversely impacts then what we're required to levy. Our mill rate, so calculating the overall levy divided by our property values. So originally we estimated $4.85 without any debt, $5.87 with debt. That's if the referendum passes. We're now at $5.12 and $6.14. The primary drivers behind that are the variance with the general state aid, the vouchers, and just the small change within our property values. This is typical. It happens every year between statutory information as well as the best estimates. There are variances, and that's where we're at this year with our final calculation. I would like to point out that we're using the remainder last year, as I shared, as we wrapped up last year's budget, we claimed ESSER dollars. This year, we're remaining through September 30th. We've claimed the remaining 2 million of ESSER. That's been a requirement, essentially, if you want to balance your budget with the legislature. So we're utilizing those dollars to balance this year's budget. They're not there next year, so that's important to remember. I will share when I bring up our budget document, we have a final balanced budget within our general fund. There are other variances, but it's important to point out with our general fund that it's balanced this year. That's where I'm going to just jump over real quick. This is the budget document that I uploaded earlier today. Same format that we've seen. We've got the total of all funds on the top. I'm just going to do a little variance here just because of the complexity with the referendum on November 5th. But by fund, we have the yellow beginning and ending fund balance. Revenues are in green, expenditures are in that kind of salmon. This should be a familiar format that you have. In fact, June and I met before this meeting, and she even brought the recommended revision this last year, and we're kind of looking at the different topics. And they do translate. It's the same format. What I have different this year is the revenues that we have up on the top right, the purple, and I'll show you where that's impacted a little bit later in the document. The little kind of violet color is 118 million. That includes $8.2 million of levy for debt repayment if the referendum passes. That would result in this year having a surplus. There are other areas because we're still paying some other debt with reserves that we have, some other fluctuations, but we would result in a overall budget surplus of about $2.5 million, but primarily driven because of that. If the referendum were to fail, is the blue option of revenues totaling 110, almost 111 million. The driving factor behind that then is that we have a $5.6 million deficit, mainly because we're still making principal and interest payments on our existing debt with reserves that we have and other fluctuations such as food service that operates at a small deficit, some other areas where we're purposefully utilizing some reserves. But you can see here on this first page, above and beyond the total budget that we have, is on the far right-hand side is that our general fund, beginning and ending fund balance shows the same balance of about $20 million, $20.1 million. We have a balanced general fund budget. Throughout this document are the other funds that we have, special education, all the IEP-driven services and programs that we offer our students. Again, we're the Head Start countywide service provider. Our non-referendum debt here is, we're done with that. We satisfied all of our outstanding payments as of last April, so there's no activity for the current year. On the bottom, right in the middle, as well as on the bottom portion of this page is where I have that purple and the blue showing the variance of that $8.2 million potential levy if the referendum passes. Is there any questions on that? I'd like to point out as well, I've got Brian Brewer here, and I think Brian's been working, Brian from Baird. Brian's been working with our district for about 25 years now, so knows us just about as well as anybody else, as well as an expert in the field. But just wanted to make sure I point that out in case you do have any other detailed questions that we can collaborate on. But I wanted to share with you the difference between these two possible levies. We have our capital expansion fund utilizing a little bit of additional dollars that we had in reserves for additional projects. We're not touching our capital improvement trust. Those dollars are available to be able to use in conjunction with some other projects in a strategic way, as well as the bottom portion here where we have the Barton proceeds yet in an interest-bearing account. Nutrition fund, a little bit of a deficit that we have, but building that program and trying to develop something that's new and interesting and for our students and staff. Our OPEB trust, this year we're not at this point in time contributing dollars towards that. We made the full contribution last year. This year it would be dependent on where we wrap up with our audited financials, looking into this year and making sure that we understand our financial position. Last couple areas, our community services fund. I gave a lot of information about this fund at the annual meeting. It's a statutory requirement to disclose the programs as well as the costs within those programs, but representing all of those out of the typical school day services that we offer to our students. And then the last piece is our cooperative programs with our Ice Bears hockey. We're the fiscal agent as well as lacrosse the Rush Lacrosse, or the fiscal agent, all of those programs costs. We reconcile that where you don't see the yellow boxes means we can't have fund balance. So this is a perfect example that we reconcile every year, that revenues equal expenditures, and we give schools money back if we end up having a surplus. But general fund balance, have two options for the levy. I think those are really the couple of good takeaways for tonight. Is there any questions on the budget before I flip back to the proposed motion?
I think just at the very top of the very top of the budget. So it shows, when we look at fund balance, there, kind of the bottom line there highlighted in yellow. It goes from 18 to 20 million, and you have the other scenario where it's 20 million, meaning it's a balanced budget. So fund balance, I'm going to say generally is going up, which we like to see. It's interesting because when you look at the top, when you talk about 2023, 24 unaudited activity, and then the rightmost column, there's a number that's negative and in red. And it kind of looks to the untrained eye like, well, we're obviously overdrawing the checking account somewhere. Yet fund balance is going up. And I'm assuming that's because we stashed away, like you've talked about, kind of money in different pockets, like paying down the debt. That's money that we have on hand already, and we have to draw that down to pay the debt. So that's where we have the money already on hand, but we have to show that as money going out. So it's not that we're losing fund balance, so to speak. Do I have that right?
I couldn't have stated it any better.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure, because you look at that the very top line, and it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to lose $2 million or 5.7 million, and yet fund balance is going up. But it's money that we've got, especially for debt and some other things that we already have stashed away. I just want to be very clear on that.
That's correct. What we're required to do, and if you remember leading into the annual meeting, there's a publication that we had that was all funds. It was an ad in the paper about, it was a good 20 inches tall by about 5 inches wide. We have to compile all of our funds. It's the way that we're required to account within our chart of accounts. And so it's siloing or pocketing, bucketing the money. This is a compilation of all of those, but that's not to say, though, that different funds can have different impacts with using already existing fund balances or even growing certain fund balances. So, yeah, no, that was nicely put. Thank you, sir.
Okay, just wanted to be sure.
Yeah.
Board members, other questions in the meantime? Otherwise, we're going to go to the proposed resolution.
Yeah, I do have, and I want to touch lightly on this because we're going to begin, and it's not going to be too far in the distant future, where I bring forward the 25-26 calendar and all of those dates that we need to be mindful of. So leading into that, we're trending towards a consumer price index of about 3.5%, which means moderate inflation. So it's certainly come down, depending on what the Federal Reserve is doing and just the economy in general. But remember that 3.5%, it's important. We don't have any remaining ESSER dollars. That is fully done in the current year. We do have declining enrollment, just like we've had for about the last 8 or 9 or 10 years, but now it's going to be entering the high school. So still graduating the larger high school class sizes the next 4 years, but that's going to be sliding up with smaller 8th grade right now, entering the high school next year. We're going to right size, just like we've been doing with our budget and making sure that we're taking a look at staffing, other services, and things like that for next year. We'll begin the next year's budget in November. June and I were even talking about, we use the Baird forecast model. It's the biggest, most complex spreadsheet that I've seen, but it's to be used for a tool not just for the next year, but also looking out for the next several years. That will begin here in November. It's a new biennial budget, and what that means is that there's unknowns. The one unknown that isn't there, even though we don't know what the final revenue limit increase is going to be, Governor Evers utilized a line item veto of a $325 revenue limit increase. And I forget, it's something like 800 years or something like that. But that $325 revenue limit increase only translates to 2.87% in our revenues when the CPI is still trending at over 3%. So inherently, we have another structural deficit just because of the gap alone, in addition to the declining enrollment and with the loss of the ESSER dollars. So it's going to be a tough budget. We've been responsible, we've been responsive, but I just want to make sure that we preface that a little bit looking ahead. Okay. I think this is the longest motion that I've brought forward in quite some time, but it's because it captures two different motions per the results of the referendum.
So I'll pause to see if board members, if there are any questions of Mr. Zarno as we've gone through this. I guess just one anecdotal item, and you started with this. this is different than in the private world as to how we set budgets, because I was trying to think from a timing perspective how we could have done this differently. But there are time limitations as to when, for instance, we have our public hearing, and we don't have this final information at that time. So in some ways, it sounds like this is normal, and maybe Brian can comment on that from what he's seen from others, but I'm assuming this is normal as it relates to the timing. It's not like we were
No.
derelict in
this-
obtaining information. This is the window with which we get it.
This
Mr. Why don't you come
is-
forward just
yeah.
to, sorry, I'm not asking you to be an expert witness here, but I kind of am.
Good evening. Yes, you are correct. This is, for about the last 30 years, this has been the process where the revenue limit worksheet is updated with the final school finance data on October 15th. And then from then till this type of a meeting, whether it's tonight or it's basically before November 1st, is when the board needs to meet to approve the final budget and the final levy. So there are a lot of conversations that happen in this kind of 15-day window across the state, you know, updating what had been preliminary at the annual meetings or budget hearings. So this is the regular process that occurs
Okay, thank you.
statewide. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Interestingly enough, so, I spent a little bit of time in Minnesota. Across the state in Minnesota right now, they're also setting the levy and the mill rate, but it's for the next year.
Yeah.
So that then allows the flexibility to say, here's what we have to work with, and then we can build a budget around that over the next 12 months, or technically eight or 9 months. So we just have it a little bit backwards, but we accommodate. This meeting is also about a week earlier than it has historically been, just with the timing of the Mondays and everything like that. But we're still, as Brian indicated, within the window of time. It statutorily has to be done by November 1st, which is then why we set both levies, because we obviously can't reconvene after the results of the election to set a final one. So, interesting.
John?
I just have a quick question. So obviously this changes the referendum data. Because, the mill rate is now 27 cents more expensive.
Correct.
Have we updated that on our website? The page, with some of the charts that?
As soon as you take action,
Okay.
then it's finalized, and we'll switch those from estimates. And then Brian, certainly here you can speak to the $2 does not change, but yes, we'll update that immediately upon action.
Yeah, the one thing that has not changed is the graphics that we've been using in the planning and working with Baird and understanding the $2, which is that black area, and I think I might even have a copy somewhere. The $2 for the levy related to a past referendum is unchanged. That's the target. Levy those dollars, utilize those levies, those dollars for the repayment of both principal and interest. It's unknown because we project out what that might be with an interest rate. The board has discretion on that with timing, duration of the loan, all of that. But what we know is that $2 is a target and unchanged. But you're right, Mr. Donaldson, that this has fluctuated, and we're going to be updating those graphics pending approval tonight. Yeah, please, yeah. Thanks, Brian.
So just to clarify, this is why when we talk about a referendum-approved debt repayment for both the principal and the interest, we isolate a portion of the total levy, because we know that every year this process happens, and the rest of your budget, state aid, vouchers, property value, enrollment, all of those things will change. So the thing that we can be consistent with, and we've talked about this at the board level multiple times throughout this year as you've built towards the referendum planning, that $2 is a target, right? We know that it's $106,250,000 for the principal amount on the ballot. We know that the planning estimate was using a 4.75, which equates to 59 million of interest. So the $2 pays back all principal and interest over that 20-year period. Ideally, rates come in lower than the 4.75 and the interest cost is lower, then you're paying off the debt quicker. So there is nothing that changed with the referendum approved, or the referendum estimate. So all the flyer material that says $2 is still accurate and applicable over the next 2 weeks.
Other questions? All right, since there aren't any other questions, I'm just going to start first. Dr. Temez, just to do a sound check that you're still able to hear us and you're with us.
Yep.
Fantastic. I will move to approve two proposed final budgets as presented, including levying property taxes in the amounts of $49,315,023 for a mill rate of $6.14 if the November referendum passes, or levying $41,115,023 for a mill rate of $5.12 if the November referendum fails, per $1,000 of assessed value on average across all municipalities and parcels. I'm going to pause and make sure I read that correctly. Does that sound good?
Yep.
That's my motion. Would there be a second?
Second.
All right, we're going to give that one to June. I'm sorry, Dr. Temez, the technology delay didn't work in your favor. All right, we have a motion and second. Does anyone want me to reread the motion? It's in front of us, so I think we're good. Motion and second. I will now call the motion. Allow me to get a roll call slip. Ms. Ergot?
Yes.
Mr. Jenkins is absent. Ms. Lang?
Yes.
Ms. Kruger?
Yes.
Mr. Swigert votes yes. Dr. Temez?
Yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Donaldson? Yes. All right, that motion carries. Thank you for your presentation and for the updated work. I'm sure this was accelerated work on your part because that information came from the state not too terribly long ago, so we appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
For your time tonight.
All right, that concludes our action items. Let's talk about future agenda items. We start with our board meeting calendar. Upcoming, we have a regular board meeting, November 4th, 5:30 p.m. here at the Education Service Center. And on November 12th, our curriculum committee meeting, 4:30 p.m., Education Service Center. November 18th, then, will be our following board meeting, 5:30 p.m. here at the Education Service Center. And we have a policy committee meeting scheduled for November 26th, 4 p.m. here at the Education Service Center. I'll just pause to see if there are any additions to the calendar. All right, we also remind the public to please watch for the official meeting notices and their postings as the times and locations may change. Do we have any other items for follow-up and communication? Well, then hearing none, we have a matter that is appropriately discussed in executive session. So I would move to adjourn into executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.851C to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance valuation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and take any such action if necessary based on its discussion, namely compensation. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Lang. We've got a motion and second to move into executive session. Final discussion. Hearing none, I will call the roll. Mr. Jenkins is absent. Ms. Ergot? Yes. Thank you. Mr. Swigert votes yes. Mr. Donaldson? Yes. Dr. Temez?
Yes.
Ms. Lang?
Yes.
And Ms. Kruger?
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries, and we're adjourned into executive session. Thank you to all those in attendance.